What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to the Season 3 opener. I'm joined, as always, by a man who always says possession is 9/10 of the law. Ryan, what's up?
It's perfect. Not a lot, man. How are you?
I guess just tell them what they need to know. I mean, we roll in with a joke. Hit them with the business. Let's jump into the story.
Yeah. Please, if you like us, if you like what we're doing, if you're interested in letting us know what you think or making suggestions, you can reach out to us on social media. You can also share us through social media. That really helps a lot. Mm-hmm. Every time we're shared from person to person, it's worth way more than somebody just seeing an advertisement or a reference somewhere. So that really helps us out. You can find us on TikTok at Cryptique_podcast. You can also find us at Cryptique Podcast on YouTube. And as always, don't forget to check out the Parabox link in the show notes. I know at least one of us says it every time. They have some really interesting designs, very cool, very elaborate, and
sexy.
Yeah, and they relate to a lot of the stuff that we do here. It's the kind of shirts that I tend to see out where it takes you a second to realize what it is. I feel like every once in a while you're rewarded by really paying attention to somebody's shirt.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Because it's some kind of reference or some kind of twist or something like that.
Yeah.
And I had one that was a bunch of it was like zombie Ewoks, and it was the Ewoking Dead.
Okay.
So it's kind of like one of those. You look at it and it's like,
it's
this
better
is
than those, though.
Yeah, but you look at it and at first they almost look like band shirts or something like that. Like, oh, that's a really cool, elaborate design. And then you realize it's, whatever, a Rendlesham Forest shirt or.
Well, and then when someone asks, you can say,
topic.
Well, dude, check out the mystery in the shirt.
Yeah.
So, anyway, what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight, if you have the courage to listen, you will hear the entirety of the priest's diary.
Ooh.
You all know about the movie that I just mentioned, The Exorcist. Most know that it's a true story about a boy from Maryland in 1949, and most of the exorcism rites took place here in St. Louis. But we have the actual diary kept by the priests throughout the exorcism. Tonight we will read entry by entry what the priests witnessed and recorded. Some of the language is a little dated, but we kept things as they appear in the original diary.
In the late 1940s in the United States, priests of the Roman Catholic Church performed a series of exorcisms on an anonymous boy documented under the pseudonym Roland Doe. The boy was the alleged victim of demonic possession, and the events were recorded by the attending priest, Father Raymond J. Bishop. Subsequent supernatural claims surrounding the events were used as elements in William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel, The Exorcist. You want to tell us about some origins of the claims? Or tell us about the claims.
In mid-1949, several newspaper articles printed anonymous reports of an alleged possession and exorcism. Roland was born into a German Lutheran family. During the 1940s, the family lived in Cottage City, Maryland. Roland was an only child and depended upon adults in his household for playmates, primarily his Aunt Harriet, known as Tilly. His aunt, who was a spiritualist, introduced Roland to the Ouija board when he expressed interest in it. So some foreshadowing, if you've paid attention to what we've said about Ouija boards before.
Right.
After Aunt Harriet's death, the family experienced strange noises, furniture moving of its own accord, and ordinary objects such as vases flying or levitating when the boy was nearby. The family turned to their Lutheran pastor, Luther Miles Schultz, for help. Long interested in parapsychology, Schultz arranged for the boy to spend a night in his home in order to observe him. Schultz advised the boy's parents to see a Catholic priest. According to the traditional story, the boy then underwent a number of exorcisms. The family traveled to St. Louis, where Roland's cousin contacted one of his professors at St. Louis University, Father Bishop, who in turn spoke to William S. Bowdern, an associate of College Church. Together, both priests visited Roland in his relative's home, where they observed a shaking bed, flying objects, and the boy speaking in a guttural voice and exhibiting an aversion to anything sacred. Bowdern was granted permission from the Archbishop to perform another exorcism. Before the exorcism ritual began, another priest, Walter Halloran, was called to the psychiatric wing of the hospital where he was asked to assist Bowdern. William Van Roo, a third Jesuit priest, was also there to assist. Since Roland's mother was a native of St. Louis, she thought of leaving her home and taking the boy to St. Louis in order to avoid some of these strange manifestations. On one evening, the word Louis was written on the boy's ribs in deep red. It seems that whatever force was writing these words was in favor of making the trip to St. Louis. Next, when there was some question of the time of departure, the word Saturday was written plainly on the boy's hip. As to the length of time the mother and the boy should stay in St. Louis, another message was printed on the boy's chest, 3.5 weeks. So, should we get into the events?
Yes, so we're going to get into the day-by-day events, but this is just something that was noted at the beginning of the diary. It appears that the paternal line was Catholic baptized but not practicing, while the maternal line was mainly Lutheran, and they're talking about Roland's parents, obviously. So, Monday, March 7th, 1949, and this is going to be... Alright, so this was at the home of Roland's non-Catholic aunt and uncle, and I believe this is still in Maryland. There were 5 or 6 relatives present. Spirit questioned through an alphabetical medium on porcelain kitchen table. Letters of alphabet written on paper were underlined whenever the table moved. A code of messages became evident. Phenomena indicated that the spirit was not the devil, but the soul of deceased Tilly. Spirit confirmed again to all present that she was Tilly by moving a heavy bed 2 or 3 feet with no one of the bystanders near the bed. Again, we're reading this exactly as it was written. All the group saw this action. Furthermore, writing appeared on Roland's body while he was reading a comic book. There was sharp pain. The writing was done through his clothes. When Roland retired, there was a violent shaking of the bed and scratching on the mattress, hardly any relief throughout the night.
Tuesday, March 8th, 1949. At the home of Roland's Catholic aunt, 2 cousins, and non-Catholic uncle, shaking of mattress, scratching stool upended several feet away from the bed. Phenomena observed by cousin who spent the night with Roland. Mattress continued to move in the direction of the uprights of the bed, even when cousin was laying alongside of Roland. All other members of the family observed the violent shaking of the mattress and heard the scratching sound.
So now we're talking about the Roanoke house. This is a house that is on Roanoke Drive in North County, so we're going to call it the Roanoke house. This is in St. Louis. Wednesday, March 9th, 1949. At the Roanoke house, as of Tuesday, Father Bishop blessed the entire house and used a special blessing in Roland's room and on his bed. A second-class relic of St. Mary Margaret was safety pinned to the extreme corner of Roland's pillow. Shortly after Roland retired, the mattress on his bed began to move back and forth in the direction of the bed uprights. The boy lay perfectly still and did not exert any physical effort. The movement in one direction did not exceed more than 3 inches, and the action was intermittent and completely subsided after a period of approximately 15 minutes. When Father Bishop sprinkled St. Ignatius holy water on the bed in the form of a cross, the movement ceased quite abruptly but began again when Father stepped out of the room. During the course of the 15 minutes of activity, a sharp pain seemed to have struck Roland on his stomach, and he cried out. His mother quickly pulled back the bed covers and lifted the boy's pajama top enough to show zigzag scratches and bold red lines on the boy's abdomen. It should be remarked that during the 15 minutes the boy was not out of the view of the 6 observers. When the mattress shaking subsided, there was peace for the remainder of the night after 11:15 p.m.
Friday, March 11th, 1949, Roanoke House and St. Francis College Church. Same home, same observers as Thursday, with addition of Fathers Bowdern and Bishop. Father Bowdern had concluded the novena service at St. Francis College Church at 9 p.m. It was arranged that relatives of the boy would take the 2 above-mentioned priests to the home of Roland. Since the novena services were in the honor of St. Francis Xavier, Father Bowdern, the pastor, thought it proper to take the first-class relic of Xavier along for a novena blessing. He likewise carried a crucifix containing the first-class relics of several of the North American martyrs in St. Peter Canisius. Shortly after Roland had retired at 11 p.m., he called downstairs that he had been frightened by a strong force that had thrown some object against a mirror in his bedroom. With safety pin opened, the relic of St. Mary Margaret had been thrown against the mirror, and the sound was like a pellet striking glass. So, reminding everybody again, we're reading like verbatim what they have. So some of these are, pretty rough.
Yeah.
In terms of the way they're written, it's very much like a shorthand that you would use just to remember something yourself.
Right, exactly.
Another occurrence was a cross mark scratched on Roland's left outer forearm. The pain was similar to that produced by a scratch of a thorn. The cross remained evident for approximately 45 minutes. Father Bowdern read the novena prayer of St. Francis Xavier and then blessed Roland with the relic, a piece of bone from the forearm of St. Francis Xavier. The boy was dozing when the bottle of St. Ignatius holy water was thrown from a table 2 feet from Roland's bed into a nearby corner, a distance of approximately 6 feet. The bottle did not break. Then Father Bowdern put his rosary around Roland's neck, and both priests recited the rosary, 1 priest on either side of Roland's bed. Father Bowdern taught Roland several quick prayers to Our Lady of Fatima. With a blessing to Roland and the family, the priest left the home about 12:30 a.m. Saturday. 5 minutes after Father Bowdern and Bishop left Roland's home, there was a heavy scraping noise in Roland's room. A bookcase was moved from alongside the bed and turned completely around, facing the entrance to the room. The stool at the dressing table moved from table to bed in about 2 feet. The stool was moved back to its position, and in a few moments it was turned over. Roland and his mother were in bed when crucifix with relics was moved from under pillow to foot of the bed. The relic of St. Margaret Mary was lost in the room. Then followed violent scratching and shaking in rhythm. The 5 people in the home then decided to ask questions of the spirit. There is some question about an amount of money which was concealed by Aunt Tilly before she died. Through many different questions, it seemed that the map which would locate the money hidden in the metal strongbox would be found in the attic of Tilly's home, the house on Warner Street in Richmond Heights, Missouri, but only Roland's father, who lives in Cottage City, Maryland, could find it. When Roland's father's name was suggested, the bed shook violently. Further questioning revealed that the money was for Arlene, the daughter of Tilly. Whenever the questioners wanted the bed shaking to stop, they called Tilly stop, and the bed stopped as though Tilly were listening for a question. On the night Tilly died, she told everyone in the house to go to bed at 10 p.m., and she died between 2 and 2:30 the following morning. The amazing parallel indicated is that the bed shaking and noise always ceased by 3 a.m.
And I don't really understand what that's supposed to mean, but it's, this is raw, man. We're giving it to you raw.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it's because, she was dead between that time.
Yeah.
And that's when the activity ceased. Maybe the activity is the most violent during the period where she would have been passing or right before.
Yeah.
But difficult to say. Yeah, well, like you said, it's raw. We're just reading through their notes.
Saturday, March 12, 1949, at the Roanoke House. Fathers Bowdern and Bishop arrived at Roland's home at 11:45 p.m. Before the arrival of the priest that evening, the bookcase in Roland's room was moved away from the wall, quickly and with precision. The bookcase with books would weigh more than 50 pounds. Then again, just before the fathers went upstairs to Roland's room, a quick scraping sound was heard. The bookcase had swung around from the wall to the side of Roland's bed in an arc of 5 or 6 feet. Father Bishop replaced the bookcase, and then Father Bowdern blessed Roland with the relic of St. Francis Xavier and holy water. The fathers prayed the rosary aloud and then prayed silently from 12 to 3 a.m. Roland had a very normal sleep, and there were no more manifestations of an evil spirit.
Sunday, March 13th at the Roanoke house. The family was alone. There was shaking of the mattress and scratching on the undersurface. The phenomena did not persist more than 1.5 hours. Monday, March 14th, 1949 at the Roanoke house. The priests were not present. A stool was thrown over Roland's bed and landed with a loud crash, but nothing was injured. The mattress shook as on many previous occasions. The shaking continued for about 2 hours.
Tuesday, March 15th, 1949 at the Roanoke house. There was the usual mattress shaking. The relic of St. Mary Margaret was thrown from the pillow. The mattress movement continued for 2 hours. Permission was granted by the Most Reverend Archbishop Joseph E. Ritter that Father William S. Bowdern, pastor of the College Church, could do the exorcism on Roland Doe. Some theorized this was a political move, placing the exorcism in the hands of the College Church, so if anything went wrong, the Archbishop and diocese could avoid ridicule. Wednesday, March 16, 1949, at the Roanoke house. Fathers Bowdern, Bishop, and Halloran arrived at the home between 10:15 and 10:30 p.m. Shortly after 10:30, Roland was sent to bed, and Father Bowdern helped him to examine his conscience and make an act of contrition. Then Father Bishop, Halloran, Roland's mother, an uncle, and aunt were all called into the bedroom in order to prepare for the exorcism. All those present knelt down beside Roland's bed, and acts of faith, hope, love, and contrition were recited together. Roland said the prayers too. The exorcism begins after a quick break. Welcome back, Crypt Keepers.
So this begins the exorcism at the Roanoke house. Next, Father Bowdern in surplice and stole, or gown and scarf, began the prayers of exorcism. Roland was awake, and the overhead lights in the bedroom were kept burning. Roland kept his hands outside the bed covers. On the first command, there was an immediate action. 3 large parallel bars were scratched on the boy's stomach. From then on, at the name of the Lord and his Blessed Mother and St. Michael, scratches appeared on the boy's legs, thighs, stomach, back, chest, face, and throat. These scratches were sharply painful and caused red marks on the body, and the marks raised above the surface of the skin, similar to engraving. Only one scratch pierced the outer layer of skin, similar to a very slight laceration, and caused a small amount of blood to flow. This scratch appeared on his left leg. Roland recoiled under the evident pain as each mark was made. Roland stated that some of the marks felt like thorn scratches, others like brands. The brand marks were more painful. The most distinct markings on the body were the picture of the devil on Roland's right leg and the word hell imprinted on Roland's chest, in such a way that Roland could look down upon his chest and read the letters plainly. The imprint of the devil and hell appeared at the repetition of the command demanding the evil spirit to identify himself. The devil was portrayed in red. His arms were held above his head and seemed to be webbed, giving the hideous appearance of a bat. All the room observers agreed that the above 2 signs could not be mistaken for other designs. In further answer to the prayer command, 2 letters, G-O, and a third pointed away from the crotch, an indication which might have meant that the devil would leave by way of urination or excrement. To the question of how many demons, A single line was scratched on Roland's right leg. There was at least 4 heavy brand marks in the form of an X. This impression may have indicated that the exorcism would take about 10 days or that the devil would depart at 10 o'clock. At least during the first days of the exorcism, the X had no significance. The markings on the legs seemed to be long scratches with no special meaning. Marks were made on the boy's body more than 25 different times during the course of the evening, each mark causing the boy to double up with pain. The next phase of the reaction took the appearance of quiet sleep. Roland seemed to relax and there were no painful scratches. The prayers were continued by Fathers Bowdern and Bishop alternating. When the prayer of St. Michael was begun, Roland began to stir in his apparent sleep. He smiled, then laughed. Next, he began sparring. He struck the headboard on his bed with strong blows with his fist, and then began punching the pillow with more than ordinary force, as he swung his arms in violence and spoke of the conflict which appeared to him. In all the manifestations since the beginning of January, there were no words spoken by Roland when he seemed to be under the influence of the devil. The family had not seen such violent reaction as was shown on this night and the following. Evidently, the exorcism prayer stirred up the devil. Holy water was sprinkled on Roland, and he came out of his apparent sleep. Roland was asked what he was doing and what he saw. He said he was fighting a huge red devil who felt slimy and was very powerful. The devil was trying to prevent him from getting through the iron gates at the top of the pit that was about 200 feet deep and was very hot. Roland wanted to fight that devil and felt that he was strong enough to overpower his enemy. Roland mentioned that there were other smaller devils. When the exorcism prayers were continued, Roland fell back into the tantrum stage, and after some deep breathing, he would go into strong combat with the devil who was trying to keep him down in the pit. There was hand-to-hand wrestling. From 12 o'clock midnight on, it was necessary to hold Roland during his fights with the spirit. 2 men were necessary to pin him down on the bed. Roland shouted threats of violence at them, but vulgar language was not used. Roland spit at his opponents many times. He used his strong arm whenever he could free himself, and his blows were beyond the ordinary strength of the boy. Roland would be brought back to awakened condition for brief periods by dousing him with water, holy water. And that is the way it has it written. Water, holy water. Like Bond, James Bond. As the night wore on, it became almost impossible to keep Roland from falling into the fitful and apparent slumber during which he went through violent gyrations. It was about 5 a.m. on the 17th before the tantrums began to moderate themselves. When Roland was awakened from his more moderate state, he was so limping weak that he could not sit up or hold his eyes open. He could not stay awake long enough to drink a glass of water. The need for water throughout this night was always the first request of Roland upon awakening. He complained of the intense heat from which he had suffered in his combats. The last phase of the night's demonstrations consisted in an apparent sleep in which Roland began to sing. He sang with a high-pitched voice and with tremendous volume such songs as Swanee and Old Man River. The tunes were not completed and were garbled versions together with the full arm gestures in a wild attempt at interpretation. In the song stage, Roland was more amenable and did not have to be subdued physically except in a few instances. His muscles became relaxed and his whole bodily attitude was one of composure. During the singing phase, Roland awakened several times on his own without slapping or holy water. They didn't mention slapping him before.
No, there's slapping later.
At about 7:30 a.m., Roland began a natural sleep and continued quite peacefully until 1 p.m. on the 17th. Then he ate an ordinary meal and participated in a game of Monopoly.
Thursday, March 17th at the Roanoke House. Fathers Bowdern, Bishop, and Holleran arrived at Roland's home between 9 and 9:30 p.m. Obviously, this is later that night. Roland's father had flown in from Maryland because of the extraordinary events of the preceding evening. Roland declared that he was very sleepy about 9 p.m. His parents helped him to get ready for bed, but had difficulty in keeping him awake long enough to remove his clothes. Roland fell into the deep tantrum sleep as on the previous night. It was necessary for the father and uncle to hold him with considerable force because of his gyrating. By means of holy water and several sharp slaps on the boy's face, Father Bishop was able to bring Roland back to his consciousness. But in a few moments, Roland was back in his wild nightmare. This state is not like natural sleep because of the threshing action. The shouting did not bring Roland back to consciousness. He could not be awakened by ordinary means. At times, it was impossible to bring him to. The prayers of the exorcism were continued while the family prayed the rosary. The commands of the formula caused violent reactions in Roland. The new phase of the case emphasized diabolical spitting. Roland spit at the three men who were holding him. He spit at Father Bowdern, who was reading the prayers of the exorcism, and tore his stole. He spit at Father Bishop, who was blessing him frequently with holy water. Roland spit directly in the faces of his father, mother, and his uncle. His eyes were shut tight, but he was able to aim quite well in spite of the cloth held near his face. When Roland was conscious, he did not know that he was spitting during the tantrums, nor did he know that he was fighting with those who held him. He fell exhausted after each ordeal, yet his pulse did not vary much from normal. There were no scratches clawed upon the boy's body in the course of the evening, but the threshing action was every bit as severe as it was on the preceding night. The threats to those who were holding Roland were not vulgar, yet were loud and eerie. Occasionally, Roland hummed a little tune or some phrases from Swanee in Old Man River. His melody was false, and the pitch was extremely high. Natural sleep came to Roland at 1:30 a.m. Then, the fathers departed.
Friday, March 18th, 1949, Roanoke House. Roland had a spell about 1 p.m. His father held him tight in his arms while his mother and aunt prayed the rosary. The struggling ceased in about 1 hour's time. Fathers Bowdern, Bishop, and Halloran arrived at Roland's home at 7 p.m., chatted, and played a game with Roland. He retired at 8:15 p.m. Roland prayed the rosary with the clergy at his bedside. The novena prayers and Our Lady of Fatima were recited in common. Next, the fathers began the litany of the saints as indicated in the exorcism ritual. In the course of the litany, the mattress began to shake. Roland was awake. The shaking ceased when Father Bowdern blessed the bed with holy water. The prayers of the exorcism were continued, and Roland was seized violently so that he began to struggle with his pillow and the bed clothing. The arms, legs, and head of Roland had to be held by three men. The contortions revealed physical strength beyond the natural power of Roland. Roland spit at the faces of those who held him and at those who prayed over him. He spit at the relics and at the priest's hands. He writhed under the sprinkling of holy water. He fought and screamed in a diabolical, high-pitched voice. During one of his quieter reactions, he was moving his feet in rhythmical fashion. Father Bowdern held the Blessed Sacrament 3 or 4 inches from the sole of the moving foot. The movement stopped on the foot which was near the Blessed Sacrament. This manifestation of the power of the Blessed Sacrament showed up time after time without fail. For short intervals, Roland became conscious, but knew very little of what happened. He felt a pain in his arms from the strong-arm tactics that he had used and which were used on him. When the exorcism was taken up again, Roland went back to his tantrum, even when he was trying to repeat some short prayers with Father Bowdern. Roland stood up in bed and fought all those around him. He shouted, jumped, and swung his fists. His face was devilish, and he snapped his teeth in fury. He snapped at the priest's hand in the blessings. He bit those who held him. By midnight, there were signs of change. Roland stood up in bed, and he dropped to his knees and quietly went through salams, or a bowing of the head. The salams were repeated 4 or 5 times. Roland said, Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us, and he also repeated the words of the Hail Mary. The next stage was beating out a rhythm on the pillow, something similar to the rhythm of trotting horses. Then Roland rose again and began his strong fight for the eviction of the devil. His gyrations were in all directions. He pulled off the upper part of his underwear and held his arms high above himself in supplication, begging in earnest or humbly. Then he made as though he were trying to vomit from his stomach. His gestures moved upwards close to his body. He seemed to try to lift the devil from his stomach to his throat. He asked that the window be opened, and then in a happy, victorious mood, he said sweetly, He's going, there he goes. His body fell limp upon the bed in a perfect relaxed condition. Everything seemed to indicate conquest. In a moment, he was normal and seemed relieved. The whole family knelt around the bed and said prayers of thanksgiving. The mother was beside herself with joy. Roland was asked what his experiences were during the latter part of the fight. He said that he saw a huge dark cloud of black vapor in front of him passing out of his vision. A figure in black robes, cowl, and white, something redacted here, walked away in the cloud. Roland got out of bed, put on his bathrobe, and saw the fathers off. He was very happy. Roland seemed to have made a complete recovery at 1 a.m., and it was around 1:30 when the clergyman departed. About 2 a.m. or a little after, Roland felt strange sensations in his stomach, and in a few moments he began to call out fearfully, "He's coming back, he's coming back." Father Bowden was called at 3:15 a.m., and the 3 exorcists went back for more of the formula. No evident progress was made, and at about 7:30 a.m., Roland dropped off into a natural sleep.
Saturday, March 19th, 1949, at the Roanoke House. The exorcists arrived at Roland's home at 7 p.m. Roland retired at 8 p.m. and the routine of the exorcism was begun again. Violent shoutings with fiendish laughter were part of the phenomena. The shouting resembled the barking of a dog, and the snapping of Roland's teeth was truly diabolical. It should be stated again that the violent reactions always followed upon the prayers of the exorcism. There had been no violence from the boy before the exorcism was begun on the night of March 16th. When the exorcist asked for a sign through the prayer, on 3 or 4 different occasions Roland urinated seemingly without control. He complained upon awakening that the urine burned him. Previous to the urination, Roland doubled up with pain in his stomach and woke up crying. He complained too that his throat hurt him. Songs were sung beautifully, in a clear voice and with real finesse. The best rendition was the La 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 of the Blue Danube, with excellent and flowing gestures of interpretation. Another song was from the hymn, The Old Rugged Cross. The striking thing about the singing on this night was the professional ability shown. Roland cannot sing well in normal life, nor does he like to sing. Father Bishop hummed the tune of Blue Danube after Roland was awake, but Roland was unable to carry the melody. He said he did not know the song. He made the same affirmation several days later. Another performance of the evening was a playful call for one of the fathers present. Roland repeated the call over and over again in a very pleasant voice, but when no response was given, Roland's voice turned hard, and the expressions became, "Father, fuck you stink." Then followed violence and demonological fighting until Roland was wholly exhausted at 3 a.m. and he fell asleep into a deep slumber. The exorcists waited half an hour and then departed. It's worthy of mention that God seemed to have pity on the boy when he became exhausted. The devil was not permitted to disturb Roland after he had fallen into his natural sleep. However, Roland was tired to the point of exhaustion every night of the exorcism. Roland berates the priests after a quick break. Hey Crypt Keepers, I want to tell you about our exciting new affiliation with Parabox. Parabox is a t-shirt subscription box with a twist. Each month you will receive a new paranormal soft style tee and info card about that month's theme. The shirt and card will contain clues to finding a hidden password for use on their website. You'll also find clues to next month's theme. Correct entries get entered in a raffle for free gear. The shirts are unique. They're pretty dope with designs about all your favorite paranormal stuff like Black-Eyed Kids, Bigfoot, Nazca Lines, and a really cool Battle of Los Angeles tee. That's one I'm hoping I will get here sometime soon. The designs are silk screened onto a soft style tee that's super comfortable. From the moment you open your Parabox, you'll be so engrossed by the t-shirt, you'll forget there's a puzzle built into it. That's right, each shirt contains a secret password. It can be in the form of codes, ciphers, riddles, numbers, images, or other hidden gems. Have fun exploring the design and putting the pieces together to figure out where to go next. Get your exclusive link in the show notes, and we get a little kickback when you sign up for the box, so you can support the show while getting cool swag with mysteries in the process. Welcome back, Crypt Keepers.
Sunday, March 20th, 1949. Surprise, surprise, Roanoke House. Since we've read that like 100 times. Roland went into his tantrum at 8:15 p.m. with more violence than on any previous occasion. All the violence followed the prayers of the exorcism. The high points of the evening were urinations, which really burned Roland, breaking wind from the rectum 3 different times, and the cursing of the exorcists. Some of the vulgarity was as follows.
Get away from me, you assholes! Go to hell, you dirty sons of bitches! God damn you sons of bitches! You dirty assholes!
Roland would use prayers to Mary and Our Lady of Fatima. Action ceased at 2 a.m.
Monday, March 21st, 1949, Roanoke House and Alexian Brothers Hospital. The family of Roland was losing sleep and the mother had to be taken to a physician, so it was thought best to take Roland to a hospital so that the other members of the family might relax. Since Roland was so boisterous in his tantrums, it was decided that the Alexian brothers would have a room away from the regular patients where Roland could scream without harm to the rest of the hospital. Then, too, the Alexian brothers have equipment for holding patients in bed when there's violence. Roland was put to bed at 10 p.m., but he feared the surroundings of the hospital, the barred window, the bare room, the straps on the bed, and the knobless door. His whole reaction was one of intense fear. Father Bowdern began the litany of the exorcism and continued on through the entire formula. Several of the brothers were present beside Father Bishop, Father Halloran, and Roland's father. When the exorcism was completed, all knelt for the rosary. Roland did not fall asleep, nor was there any discernible reaction on the part of the devil. The exorcist group left the room while Roland's father read prayers for his boy during the space of half an hour. One of the most edifying scenes since the beginning of the case was to see the father using prayers to get his son to sleep at 11:30 p.m. So that's a side note by one of the priests. Roland fell into a sound normal sleep and continued peacefully through the night. His father slept in the same room. Roland awakened at 6:30 a.m. and was taken home for the day. Note that the boy was uncomfortable here and fearful due to the strange surroundings and other strangers, thus nothing eventful happened.
Tuesday, March 22nd, 1949, Roanoke House. Roland went to bed at his uncle's home about 9:30 p.m. Shortly after he retired, the bed began to shake and it seemed that operations were in progress again. Roland's mother called Father Bishop, and he, with 2 other priests, drove out to the home and arrived there with the Blessed Sacrament at 11 p.m. The 3 priests knelt at the bedside of Roland and began the prayers of exorcism. The bed shook during the short intervals on 3 different occasions. When the exorcism was completed, the rosary was recited and Roland went off into a natural sleep. The fathers departed at midnight and no further action took place. Wednesday, March 23rd, 1949, St. Francis Church Rectory. Father Bowdern arranged that Roland might have a room at the college church rectory. 2 beds were provided so that Roland's father might sleep in the same room with his son. Roland took a brief instruction on the Catholic religion and then went to bed about 9:30 p.m. Short acts of faith, hope, love, and contrition were recited by all the group, including Roland. Immediately upon the first invocations of the litany, Roland went into his tantrum. He fought and kicked and spit so that 3 men could scarcely hold him. In the course of the evening, Roland broke Father Halloran's nose and caused Father Van Roo's nose to bleed. The first blows were accurate, quick, and deadly, although Roland's eyes were shut. At the command, Roland urinated rather copiously, and on coming to himself complained of the burning sensation. There were 4 or 5 such urinations during the evening. Several times there was passing of wind through the rectum. The language of Roland became abusive and dirty. He said he met one of the fathers in hell and stated the year is 1957. He indicated surprise at finding the father in hell. The vile and filthy talk which followed makes anyone shudder. Roland spoke of his penis as a beautiful pecker, a willy-dilly-pilly, so round, so firm, with a red top and a hole in the middle. He pulled the towel from his loins and shook his body in his suggestive, shimmy fashion. His expressions were lowly and smacked of the abuse of sex. When Roland came to normal, from time to time, he would say that the men down there were using filthy language. Roland was never accustomed to filthy expressions in his regular life. With more contortions, barking, and singing, Roland finally went off into a natural sleep at 2:30 a.m. His body was limp and completely fagged out, or very tired.
Thursday, March 24th, 1949, St. Francis College Church Rectory. At the rectory, reactions began at 9:45 p.m. and continued until 2:30 a.m. Father Bishop thought that this would be the last night since it was the Feast of St. Gabriel, and the next day was the Feast of the Annunciation. Father Bowdern believed that the X, or Roman numeral 10, mark on Roland from the first night of the exorcism should be interpreted as the 10th day, so he did not expect the devil to leave until the following night. Roland had great physical strength. 4 men were holding him. Roland ran the gamut of shouting, screaming, barking, singing, kindly expressions, urination, and passing foul air. Now, this is what's in here. I'm not saying that this is a sign of someone being possessed, for sure, but I think what they're saying is that he's doing it in a way that is trying to be obnoxious, and that's why they're considering it part of this. But so one of the assisting fathers was met in hell in 1956. He was called a big fat ass and an ox. Michael, the workman who helped Roland, was consistently in Roland's bitter impressions or in silly rhymes. Michael, Pikel, Michael, Psycho, Michael, you look so dirty. The filthiest talk was given out after midnight on the Feast of the Annunciation. Roland spoke of kissing his pecker and using the stick for pleasure. Then he would say, "Isn't it pretty?" He turned upon the priests at his bedside. "You have big pricks too, and you like to rub them up and down. You have big tits, you big ox." Then followed a sucking sound. He called out to the exorcists too. "Cut out the damn Latin. Get away from me, you goddamn bastards." About 2 a.m., Roland noted from his tantrum that the bystanders were going to stay to the end. In a coy tone, he remarked, "You like to stay with me. Well, I like it too." The Blessed Sacrament had no noticeable effect on the course of the night. Roland slept from 2:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m.
Friday, March 25th, 1949, St. Francis College Church Rectory. At the rectory, Roland was very restless and could not sleep. The group of priests prayed outside his door. For brief periods, Roland fell into fitful tossing, which was not real sleep. On one occasion, Roland fell out of his bed but was not hurt. Next, he wilted or weakly shrunk awkwardly into the arms of Father Bowden and Van Roo. Shortly before midnight, he lay prone on his back with his arm stiff at his side. He began a leg and arm movement as a gymnastic exercise. His arms moved out straight from his body and then moved back in straight lines to the side of his body. There was no noise. After midnight, there was some pitching about, but not for long intervals. Roland cursed his father and spit at him, and then kicked at the priest at his bedside. He pushed the nearby chair with his foot several times and fell into a deep sleep at 1 a.m. This was Friday night, the 10th night since the exorcism was begun. Perhaps the X given on the first night was to mean 10 days. Back at the Roanoke house on Monday night, the home was blessed by Father Bowdern. No disturbances occurred Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday nights, and Roland was getting back to his normal life.
Thursday, March 31st, 1949 at the Roanoke House. At 11:30 p.m., Roland went downstairs and complained that he was feeling ill and that his feet felt cold, then hot. When the family went up to the bedroom with him, the disturbances began. First, the shaking of the bed. He began to write on the sheet with his finger, and we're talking about the sheet of the bed. He's writing out letters with his finger as if it were a pencil. Explaining between spells that he seemed to be reading from a blackboard. They were unable to make out what he was writing on the sheet. Then he began to talk, telling what he saw on the blackboard. Notes taken by his cousin were as follows.
I will stay 10 days, but will return in 4 days. If Roland stays, if you stay and become a Catholic, it will stay away. God will take it away 4 days after it has gone 10 days. God is getting powerful. The last day when it quits, it will leave a sign on my front. Father Bishop and all people that mingle with me will die a terrible death.
Family called the rectory about midnight. Fathers Bowdern and Van Roo arrived at the house at about 1 a.m. and Father Bowdern began the rite of exorcism. At the command, Roland, in a spell, called for a pencil. At this point, and frequently at the beginning of the subsequent spells, he addressed one or both of two persons, Pete and Joe. Taking the pencil, he began to write with it on the head of the bed, which was covered with a white cloth. This type of spell and writing was repeated perhaps 8 to 10 times. What he wrote was recorded for the most part. The family washed away the writing a few times, making room for more, and the uncle fastened large sheets of wrapping paper to the bed. The following is a record of most of the writings, though it is not complete. Some of the things written were repeated. The demon reveals its name after a quick break. Welcome back, Crypt Keepers.
1. In answer to the first set of questions, he wrote the Roman numeral X. It was clearly the numeral with the cross bars at the top and bottom. This was written 4 times on the first occasion and was repeated several times during the exorcism, usually in answer to the question diem or day. 2. I will stay 10 days and then return after the 4 days are up. 3. I am the devil himself. You will have to pray for a month in the Catholic Church. For an answer to the command to give nomen lingus latina, name, tongue, Latin, I speak the language of the persons, presumably the person who is possessed. I will put in Roland's mind when he makes up his mind that the priests are wrong about writing English. I will, that is the devil will, try to get his mother and dad to hate the Catholic Church. I will answer to the name of spite. 5. In 10 days I will give a sign on his chest. He will have to have it covered to show my power. 6. He drew a strange thing that looks somewhat like a map with 2,000 feet written on it, apparently connected with the early dreams about hidden treasure and a map to find it. I believe that it was in this connection that he spoke, also saying, yeah, this is what I got on the Ouija board. He drew a face also and wrote the words, Dead Bishop. 7. You may not believe me, then Roland will suffer forever. 8. When commanded to give the sign in Latin, he wrote meaningless marks on the paper, not even letters of the Roman alphabet.
Friday, April 1st, 1949, Roanoke House and St. Francis College Church Rectory. Roland had been taking instructions in Catholic doctrine since Wednesday, March 23rd, under the direction of Father McMahon, Roland's father and mother, leaving Roland's choice of religion to himself. They had agreed that Roland would not be confirmed in the Lutheran Church as had been planned previously. With the relapse into possession after 5 days of respite, the mother, father, and Roland agreed that the proper thing to do was have Roland baptized Catholic. Sponsors were picked, and the baptismal party was to arrive at the college church between 8 and 8:30 p.m. As the party of 5 relatives drove from Roland's home, Roland felt a strange sensation in his feet. There were alternations of hot and cold feelings, and then Roland went into one of his spells. He began by saying,
"So you were going to baptize me? Ha ha!"
Roland grabbed the steering wheel of the automobile, and his uncle was forced to pull up to the curb in order to subdue the violence. Roland stiffened and fought. It was a major task to remove him from the front seat and force him into the back of the car. Roland's father and uncle held Roland in the back seat while the aunt drove. Even with careful supervision, Roland leaped up to seize his aunt as she drove. An interesting sidelight is that the radio in the car would not operate when Roland was in a spell, although it worked before and after. In the college church rectory, another hard struggle made it almost impossible for 3 men to carry Roland from the car to the rectory. Inside the door of the rectory, Roland shouted and spit. He was thrown on the floor of one of the parlors and displayed his physical violence. Even ice-cold water had little effect on him. The father and uncle were completely exhausted from the battle. Roland was carried to the 3rd floor of the rectory and placed to bed. There was little hope that the baptism could be administered at the baptismal font in the presence of the chosen sponsors. Michael the workman was chosen as proxy. Roland was in and out of his seizures for short periods, but there was not enough time for the long profession of faith and abjuration or denouncing of heresy. Then asked, "Dost thou renounce Satan?" He went off into a spell. The action was repeated 3 or 4 times, but Roland went off before he could answer the question with the words, "I do renounce him." Finally, Roland was normal long enough to give the answers. When Father Bowdern came to the baptism proper, the physical resistance exceeded any violence of the evening. Roland remained conscious for the words, "Ego te baptizo in nomine Patris." I baptize you in the name of the Father. And then there was a violent upheaval. Nonetheless, the baptism was completed with a generous amount of baptismal water. It seemed from the reactions that the Lutheran baptism had not been administered properly or had not taken effect. After the baptism, the prayers of the exorcism were continued. The usual spitting, gyrating, cursing, and physical violence continued until 11:30 p.m.
Saturday, April 2nd, 1949, St. Francis College Church. Roland awakened at 9:40 a.m. but was not calm. He threw a pillow at the light and broke the shade in the bulb. The crockery basin in his room was likewise shattered. This was the morning when Roland was to receive his first Holy Communion. Fathers Bishop and O'Flaherty were called in to assist Father Bowdern in the preparation for Holy Communion. It was evident that a struggle was at hand. There was no difficulty in going through the conditional confession. Perhaps this quietness indicated again that the regular procedure for the baptism of infants was followed. When Father Bowdern began the prayers for Holy Communion, Roland went into a spell, kept his eyes shut and his mouth closed, but he was not hard to hold at this time. Roland rallied himself for brief moments, yet whenever Father Bowdern brought the Eucharistic particle near Roland, the boy went into a spell. On 5 different occasions, when the particle was placed in Roland's mouth, he spit it out onto the corporal or purificator, which was always held in front of his mouth for caution, a small white linen cloth used to wipe the chalice. After nearly 2 hours of vain attempts, Father O'Flaherty suggested that we pray the Rosary in honor of Our Lady of Fatima, especially since this was the first Saturday of the month. When the fathers had completed the Rosary, another attempt was made with Holy Communion. This time Roland was able to swallow, and he made his first Holy Communion under extraordinary opposition. Roland finished dressing himself and prepared to leave for home. Father Bowdern asked Father O'Flaherty to drive the car while he himself, Roland's father, and Roland sat in the back seat. It was about 11:45 a.m., only a few minutes after the car was in motion. Roland jumped off the seat and grabbed Father O'Flaherty and had to be pulled off with force. Roland was not normal on the road for more than a few minutes at a time. Back at the Roanoke house, he came to long enough to eat a fairly good-sized breakfast. During the remainder of the day, there were only brief intervals of consciousness. The sacraments had stirred up Satan more than any other priestly administration. The family was nervously worn from the long day of fighting. Fathers Bowdern, Bishop O'Flaherty, and Michael the workman from Alexian Brothers arrived at Roland's home at 7:40 p.m. and spells continued. There was no response to the command before 8:40 p.m. One short spell of less than a minute occurred between 8:40 and 11:15 p.m. During this period, Roland ate a dish of ice cream. You can't pass up ice cream. At 11:15, Roland ran downstairs and sat on the arm of a parlor chair. He was becoming so nervous that he could scarcely stay in the bedroom. Father Bowdern feared that Roland would become violent downstairs, so he asked Roland to go back to the bedroom. Roland trotted up the stairs in boyish fashion, turned into his bedroom, and ran straight for the reliquary of the Holy Cross. Father O'Flaherty caught his hand in time, but Roland reached for the open ritual exorcism prayer book and tore 4 pages out of the exorcism formula. He grasped with lightning speed. Then followed a spell in which Father Bowdern commanded that Roland should respond in Latin to Dicas mihi nomen tuum, et horum exitas tui finalis. Tell me your name and the hour of your final departure. The only responses were a repetition of the Latin words followed by a remark.
Stick it up your ass. No.
At 12:15, spells continued with the same type of responses to the command. There was jumbled mockery of the Latin questions. However, at this stage, writing appeared on the boy. The letters G-O were printed in red as they were on the first night of the exorcism. At the command, tell me the time, 3 parallel scratches appeared on Roland's thigh. At the command et horum, an hour, an X was branded. 3 18s were branded on different parts of Roland's body. At 1:15 a.m., Roland was so nervous that he begged to get out of bed and sit on a chair. His hands trembled in a nervous frenzy. He begged his father to take him back to Washington on Sunday. He could not stand the ordeal any longer. He feared going crazy. Relief came at 1:40 and a natural sleep.
Sunday, April 3rd, 1949, Roanoke House. At 7 a.m., Roland threw a pillow against the ceiling light, but then went back to sleep. There was another short seizure at 8:30, but Roland went back to sleep until 11:30, then took breakfast. About 12 noon, Roland walked downstairs but went into a spell several times, but there was nothing of a serious note until 4 p.m. Roland engaged in a ball game with his father, 2 uncles, and a cousin. At one point, he tried to throw the ball to his father but began to stagger as a drunken man. His father rushed to his assistance when the boy began to run in a straight line across the lawns of the 2 neighbors. He ran with his eyes shut and with high speed. 3 men closed in on him and carried him back home. In the kitchen, Roland lifted the heavy kitchen table with one of his legs. Roland ate very little supper and seemed abnormal. On one occasion, he wrapped his leg around the leg of the table and was pulled away by means of strong physical force. Fathers Bowdern, Van Roo, Bishop, and O'Flaherty arrived at the home at 7 p.m. Within a few minutes, Roland had a spell in which he grabbed at his aunt and would have torn her dress if several men had not come to her assistance. Roland was carried upstairs, fighting, but became himself shortly after he was thrown upon the bed. This was Passion Sunday, so the fathers thought that God would put an end to Roland's suffering on this night. The exorcism was begun in full, but there was no response at the beginning of the prayer. One new feature of this evening was a kind of devilish prophecy concerning Roland's little cousin. Shouting and singing in rhythm, Roland repeated over and over for about 10 minutes.
You will die tonight. You will die tonight.
It was hard to quiet Roland by any means but a pillow on his face. From 9:30 to 12, there was no disturbance except snoring and restless sleep. The fathers departed at midnight, but more trouble began at 12:30. It became necessary to bind the arms of Roland with tape and to place gloves on his hands. Then he complained of the pain from the adhesive tape and the heat of the gloves. However, when the tape and gloves were removed, Roland went about his violence again. It was 3:30 before quiet came.
Monday, April 4th, 1949, trip back to Maryland. Arrangements were made that the family was to go back to Washington, D.C. by train at 9:30 a.m. Roland's father had lost a lot of time from his work, and the strain upon the St. Louis family was beginning to tell. Fathers Bowdern and Van Roo were to accompany Roland and his parents on the trip. It was difficult to arouse Roland from his sleep, but cold water dashed in his face brought him out sufficiently so that he could be dressed. He was taken to the railroad station and accompanied by his father, mother, uncle, and friend of the family. There was no difficulty boarding the train. Roland walked and chatted normally. What happened on the trip and thereafter will form another report. The Jesuits who saw Roland under possession were Reverend George Bishopberger, Father Raymond J. Bishop, Father Joseph Bolin, Father William S. Bowdern, Father Edmund Burke, Father John O'Flaherty, Father William Van Roos, Father Walter Holleran, and Brother Albert Schell.
En route to Washington, there was no trouble on the train all day. One short spell of violence occurred when Roland retired at 11:30 p.m.
Tuesday, April 5th, 1949, home in Cottage City, Maryland. Roland woke normally on the train and was taken to his home in Cottage City, Maryland without a mishap. In the course of the morning, Father Bowdern met Father Hughes, the assistant pastor at St. James Church in Mount Rainier, and found that he had made arrangements with the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Washington that Father Bowdern would have full permission to continue the exorcism. Neither the pastor nor the assistant at St. James, in whose parish Roland lives, was able to assume the full responsibility of the case because of lack of room for the boy. It was thought advisable by all concerned that Roland should not be kept at home. Fathers Bowdern and Hughes tried several hospitals in Washington, but because of the nature of the case, no one was willing to accept the burden.
Wednesday, April 6, 1949, Fathers Bowdern and Hughes drove to Baltimore to inquire about a room at the Institute of the Daughters of Charity to see if they were willing to take the boy, but the fathers objected since the case was not considered psychiatric, and furthermore, since the hospital was dependent on the state of Maryland for aid, each patient had to be accounted for on the records. It would have been strikingly odd to include the treatment of exorcism. With disappointment in Washington and Baltimore, Father Bowdern decided to call again on his devoted friends at the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis. He called long distance and was assured a place for Roland through the kindness of Brother Rector. Roland was normal during the entire day. He took some exercise in the afternoon. Upon retiring, he had one very slight spell, which lasted only seconds and may have been a nightmare.
Thursday, April 7th, 1949, Cottage City, Maryland. At Cottage City, Roland was normal all day. He worked in the afternoon, spayed a little bit, and caught the lawn. But the evening spell lasted for 5 hours, from 9:15 p.m. to 2:15 a.m. During one branding, Roland was awake. During the exorcism, at the command, at least 20 brands had appeared on Roland's body. Many occurred at the name of Jesus as we recited the Hail Mary. The first mark was clearly a number 4. Some other marks may have been the number 4 also, but were obscure. Other marks, single stroke, double strokes, seemingly a pitchfork several times, 4 strokes, or claw marks of various lengths on belly or legs. One set of such claw marks from thigh to ankle, tearing off a scab near the ankle. When these marks occurred, the boy's hands were kept away from his body. 1. Branding occurred on his leg as he started to lie down after the preceding mark had been observed. Most of the branding occurred under his clothing or at least under the sheet covering him. 2. Spitting violence and shitting in his underwear. 3. Singing or humming the Ave Maria. 4. Filthy talk. 5. Writing on his own body with fingernails the words Hell and Christ in large capital letters. 6. Through Roland, the devil said he would keep the priests until 6 a.m. He made the statement at 2 a.m. when everyone was fagged out or exhausted, that odd phrase that we talked about earlier. He said he would prove his threat by having Roland awake immediately. Roland awoke with a start, but the fathers were relieved when sleep came 15 minutes after 2 o'clock. It seemed throughout the possession that whenever Roland was completely exhausted, God permitted him to go off to sleep and commanded the devil to be quiet.
Friday, April 8th, 1949, still in Cottage City, Maryland. Roland was normal all day. There was a 5-hour session in the night from 8:15 p.m. to 1:20 a.m. One began when Roland was alone in the bathroom a few minutes after the priests arrived. 2 1/4 hours of great physical violence. Half hour of crying. This continued with shorter spells until 1:20 a.m. Violence, spitting, nonsense, jumbling of Latin questions, singing Blue Danube, Ave Maria, and so forth. There was filthy talk and movements and filthy attacks on those at the bedside concerning masturbation and contraceptive and sexual relations of priests and nuns. Irritated and impatient after the long struggle. Fathers Hughes and Canning arrived with the Blessed Sacrament about 11 p.m. The house was blessed by Father Hughes. Roland spit twice through a pillow in the direction of the Blessed Sacrament. He took one sedative, spat it out, then finally swallowed it. Saturday, April 9th, 1949, return trip back to St. Louis. On the return trip to St. Louis, Roland was normal all day. He underwent a short spell upon retiring in the evening.
Sunday, April 10th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital. When Roland returned to St. Louis, he was sent immediately to the Alexian Brothers Hospital. There, the brothers took him into one of their private living rooms for the day. Fathers Bowdern, O'Flaherty, Van Roos, and Bishop arrived at the hospital shortly after 7 p.m. Roland was taken to the 5th floor where he occupied the same room which was assigned to him on the earlier visit. The exorcism was completed and several rosaries recited, but no disturbance occurred. Roland went into a good sleep about 11 p.m., but the fathers decided to awaken him after midnight in order to give him Holy Communion. Roland was so fatigued that it seemed almost hopeless to keep him awake for more than seconds at a time. When the fathers were planning to abandon the experiment, Roland became quite normal and was able to receive communion without special effort. The Blessed Sacrament brought peace to Roland. He settled back on his pillow with a smile and was soon in deep sleep. Nothing disturbing happened throughout the night.
Monday, April 11th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital. Brother Emmett kept Roland occupied with manual work on his hospital floor, and what was most valuable, won the friendship and confidence of Roland so that the psychiatric surroundings were more understandable and agreeable. Fathers Bowdern, Van Roos, and Holleran arrived at the hospital at 8 p.m. Father Bishop brought some Catholic readers and stories for Roland so that he would have more than his catechism for study and reading. And the catechism is basically like the Catholic way. So if you have any questions about it, just get a catechism. Roland went to bed at 9 p.m. and the exorcism was completed. The evening gave every reason for expecting quiet. While the fathers were reciting the rosary, Roland felt a sting on his chest, but upon examination, only a spot of red was observable. The rosary was continued until Roland was struck more sharply by a branding on his chest. The letters were in capital and red in the direction of Roland's crotch. Exit seemed to be quite clear. On another branding, a large arrow followed up the word exit and pointed to Roland's penis. The word exit appeared at 3 different times in different parts of Roland's body. Roland felt terrible pains in his kidneys and in his penis. He cried from the burning sensations. When he urinated, he complained of even more severe pain. At midnight, the fathers planned to give Roland Holy Communion, but Satan would have no part of it. Even while the institution of the Blessed Sacrament was explained to Roland, his body was badly scratched and branded. The word hell was printed on his chest and thigh. Upon the explanation of the apostles becoming priests and receiving our Lord at the Last Supper, scratches appeared from Roland's hips to his ankles in heavy lines, seemingly as a protest to Holy Communion. When Father Bowdern attempted to give Roland a small particle of the sacred host, the boy was taken off by a quick seizure, and the devil said that he would not allow Roland to receive. After 4 or 5 attempts, it was thought that a spiritual communion would have to suffice. But even the expression of the words, "I want to receive you in Holy Communion," was cut off by a seizure at the word communion. From all further indications during the evening, it seemed that the attempts to administer the sacrament of the Eucharist roused the devil more than ordinarily. He went through his usual routine of fighting, barking, cursing, swearing, spitting, and shouting, but kept on longer than usual. There was no quiet sleep. One of the edifying events of the night was the devotedness of the Alexian brothers to constant prayer and their professional attitude at the bedside.
Tuesday, April 12th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital. Action began after the exorcism prayers were completed. During the general recitation of the rosary by the fathers and brothers, the regular performance began, but with the omission of riding on Roland's body. The noise and singing were very disturbing to everyone. Roland gave no response to the command except to imitate the Latin words, then laugh or say,
Stick it up your ass.
One new phase was the display of the devil's power over the senses and the external personality of Roland. In one instance, the devil said he would have Roland awaken and the boy would be pleasant and attractive. The devil's promise was true. A few minutes later, the devil said he would have Roland awaken, but this time he would be offensive. True to the promise, Roland came out of the spell very irritable, and he complained quite bitterly to those who held him. Several attempts were made to give Roland Holy Communion after midnight, but each trial was unsuccessful. The devil showed definitely that he was not Roland speaking, for he said, I will not let Roland receive Holy Communion. It was about 1:30 a.m. before quiet sleep followed. Roland visits the church's White House retreat after a quick break. Welcome back, Crypt Keepers.
Wednesday, April 13th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital and the White House Retreat. Roland received Holy Communion on arising in the morning without encountering difficulty. During the afternoon, Roland was taken out to the White House Retreat House and shown the chapel as well as the outdoor stations of the cross. At the 14th station, when Roland was farthest away from the numerals, he went into a spell and had to be carried back to the car by force. The seizure lasted about 20 minutes. Back at Alexian Brothers Hospital in the evening, Roland was ready for bed at 8:45 p.m. He was bright and cheerful, and especially liked some trick gadgets that Father McMahon had given him. As he sat on the bed, and before any prayers were begun, Roland went off into a quick but violent seizure. It seemed to the exorcist that this would be an important evening. Roland spoke almost immediately and said that God had commanded him to leave at 11 o'clock tonight, but that he would not leave without a struggle. He proved the latter part of his promise by showing relatively more physical power than he had at any previous time. He stayed in his first spell for 20 minutes while Father Bowdern worked on the exorcism and the brothers prayed the rosary in honor of Our Lady of Fatima. In the command, Father Bowdern had always been insisting on getting response in Latin and kept up his demands. The devil ignored the command, answered in Pig Latin, playfully imitated the commands, or used the common expression, "Stick it up your ass." He began singing the words, "Stick it up, stick it up." At no instance up to this point in the case had the devil answered in Latin, although his imitation of Latin was clear and distinct. Filthy talk and damning threats to those at the bedside continued, as on other evenings. A new note of the evening was the loud nuisance shouting of "Fire!" At 10:45, Roland began to imitate the sound of a large church bell sounding out the 11 o'clock hour. Bong! 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 After 11 p.m., the same cathedral bell sounds were repeated, but it was very evident that the devil had deceived everyone by his first remark of the evening. After midnight, unsuccessful attempts were made to give Roland Holy Communion. Satan said again that he would not permit Holy Communion. He laughed at each of the attempts. Roland could not repeat the word communion before he went into his spell. The brothers had prayed valiantly for several hours around midnight. They completed more than 50 decades of the Rosary, and their prayerful assistance is worthy of the highest comment. Round-the-clock adoration of the Blessed Sacrament was begun by the brothers on Monday or Tuesday evening.
Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, April 14th, 15th, and 16th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital. Roland received Holy Communion from the hospital chaplain, Father Weidman, on Thursday morning. The fathers arrived for the prayers of exorcism in the evening. Rosary was continued by the brothers. There were no reactions before or after midnight on Thursday. The fathers were informed this night that Brother Rector purchased a new statue of Our Lady of Fatima and had it placed in a conspicuous spot on the first floor corridor of the hospital. It was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin with the petition that Our Lady of Fatima would intercede for Roland in this ordeal. The brothers promised community devotions to Our Lady of Fatima should Roland be spared from further affliction. No disturbances of any sort occurred on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, or Holy Saturday. Roland listened attentively to the Tray or services broadcast over the WLW on Good Friday. On Holy Saturday, Brother Rector bought a small, colorful statue of St. Michael the Archangel. The statue was placed in Roland's room. It should be remarked here that one of the most effective prayers of the exorcism was that dedicated to St. Michael. After midnight of Saturday, arrangements were made that Roland should be awakened for 6:30 a.m. communion, and that he should attend the second Mass at the Brothers' Chapel Easter morning.
Easter Sunday, April 17th, 1949, Alexian Brothers Hospital. Father Weidman, hospital chaplain, made 3 unsuccessful attempts to give Roland Holy Communion in his room. After some waiting and slapping of Roland, the 4th attempt succeeded. It was about 6:45 a.m. when he came to the Regina Caeli, Queen of Heaven. Roland jumped out of bed and grabbed the book from the brother and reached for the scapular from the brother's habit, which was placed on a nearby chair. Roland fought and spit at the brother and trampled the scapular underfoot in an Indian war dance. The devil said, "I will not let him go to Mass. Everyone thinks it will be good for him." It was impossible to get Roland to the chapel because of his frequent seizures. Father Bowdern was called to the hospital, and shortly after his arrival, the spell was broken. There was no further reaction until evening. In the evening, Roland was spending a little more time with the brothers at recreation outside the hospital. Brother Emmett was escorting Roland back to the basement floor of the hospital when Roland went into a fighting spell. The brother was alone and shouted for help, but it was some time before the other brothers heard him. Brother Emmett was quite exhausted from the struggle. Roland was carried into the entrance and placed into his 5th-floor room. The fathers immediately began the prayers of exorcism, and the usual indications of violence continued. The devil showed his power again by saying that he would have Roland awakened and ask for a knife. He had threatened to kill those who molested him while in his seizure, and they're not talking about like sexual molestation.
No, molested to be like disturbed or bothered.
When Roland came out of the spell, he asked for a knife so that he might cut an Easter egg. A little later, the devil said that he would have Roland awakened and ask for a drink of water, and Roland carried out the task. There was no response to the command except taunting remarks to the exorcist. Roland was becoming weary of the long performance. Roland did not begin to sleep until midnight. The fathers left the hospital at 12:45.
Monday, April 18th, 1949. 8 a.m., Roland awoke in a spell, kicking at the brother at the bedside. He jumped out of bed, seized the holy water bottle, threatening to throw it at the brothers, then sprinkled water towards them. Finally, he threw the bottle over their heads, smashing it against the ceiling. 8:15 a.m., Father Weidman attempted to give Roland communion. It was impossible. Spitting, unable to make even spiritual communion, made 1 spiritual communion.
So I think he's continuing to try, like he writes spitting on, and then like keeps trying, and he's like, all right, well, we did one.
The devil then seized him and said that 1 devil was out, and that Roland had to make 9 communions, sacraments, or spiritual communions, and that he would leave his body. Roland continued for an hour, unable to make the spiritual communion or receive the sacrament. 10 a.m. There were more spells when attempting spiritual communion. Roland was able to say, "I wish to receive you." That is all the priest attempted to have him say, since it was sufficient. The devil laughed and said,
That isn't enough. He has to say one more word. One little word. I mean, one big word. He'll never say it. He has to make 9 communions. He'll never say that word. I am always in him. I may not have much power always, but I am in him. He will never say that word.
severe spells of violence, singing, and urination. 11:30 a.m. Roland said he was very hungry and wanted a bath and food. We put him off until noon. Then gave him a tray of cake, ice cream, and milk. He threw the glass against the wall, scattering broken glass all over. Violence intermittent until about 1:30 p.m. Roland was very discouraged and disgusted and mean. In the afternoon, the brothers brought Roland a serving of chipped beef and arranged Roland's tray on a little table in his room. Roland picked up the plate, ran over to the window, held the plate in an almost perpendicular manner in the palm of his hand, and dared the brothers to step closer. One of the brothers crawled under the bed to catch Roland at his feet. The other circled the bed to restrain Roland's arm, but the plate was fired mightily against the opposite wall. No one was hurt, but the plate was broken to bits. On the trip to the hospital on this evening, the fathers had decided that in the command, Father Bowdern should ask for the responses in English. Moreover, the medals were left on Roland in spite of his protest to the contrary. A crucifix was to be placed in Roland's hand when he was under his spell. These resolutions were discussed and carried out because of the information gathered from the reading concerning several other cases of possessions. Father Bowdern, O'Flaherty, and Bishop arrived at the hospital at 7 p.m., and Father Van Roos had been with Roland during the great part of the day, but was relieved by the brothers shortly before the evening meal. Roland asked to telephone his mother, but on the way to the telephone, he went into a spell and had to be carried back to his room in a fighting mood. Father Bowdern read the rite of exorcism quietly. When he came to the words, "Tu vox confines, tu viscera regas," best translation, "your voice controls the boundary of your bowels," he blessed Roland with the sign of the cross. That's an odd phrase. Roland repeated the expressions perfectly and asked for their meaning. Several times later, he repeated the Latin. The signs of the cross and the crucifix were very effective. Roland fought hard when the crucifix was forced into his hand. In one instance, Roland threw the crucifix out of his hand. Next, Father O'Flaherty began teaching Roland the first half of the Ave Maria in Latin because Roland had expressed a real interest in Latin. In the space of 15 minutes, Roland could recite a good portion of the prayer unassisted. After the memory lesson, Father O'Flaherty told Roland the complete story of Our Lady of Fatima, to which Roland paid strict attention. A little later, he asked for a Catholic reader containing 8th grade prose and poetry, and then thumbed through several stories as he sat in bed. Finally, in a boyish way, he took to balancing the book on his knees and on his head. Roland went into a spell while he had the book on his knees, and immediately the book was thrown into the corner of the room. From 9:30 until 11 p.m., Roland was in and out of seizures. During his quiet moments, the most impressive part of the evening was Roland's leading of the rosary while the fathers and brothers answered. Roland's reverence seemed truly remarkable. Roland was more cooperative this night than he had ever been before. He felt that he had to pray whenever he was out of his seizure. He asked whether he could make spiritual communions on his own, and he wondered whether, through his prayers, he himself could bring on a seizure. His efforts at spiritual communion brought on spells at different times. Whenever he became normal, he referred it to prayer. He stated several times he saw more light each time he went into a spell. The light seemed to be at the end of a dark tunnel. Roland complained several times that the medals on his neck were hot, and he asked that they be removed, but the medals were not taken off. Father Bowdern forced a small reliquary crucifix into Roland's hand when he was in a spell. The reaction to the medals and cross was exceptional. When Father Weidman blessed Roland with his ordination crucifix and asked Roland to kiss the image, Roland went into a spell. During all the above seizures, Father Bowdern continued to command and asked that the response be given in English. The procedure was a change from the regular routine. In the commands up to this time, Latin had been insisted upon. The devil in one instance, on March 31st, had written that the priests were wrong and asking for Latin answers, and he stated that he uses the language of the person possessed. While Father Bowdern used the command, Father Bishop used over and over again the exorcism prayer to St. Michael. At 10:45 p.m., the most striking event of the evening occurred. Roland was in a seizure but lay calm. In clear, commanding tones and with dignity, a voice broke into the prayers. The following is an accurate quotation. Satan, Satan, I am St. Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately, now, now, now. Then there were the most violent contortions of the entire period of exorcism, that is, since March 16th. Perhaps this was the fight to the finish. Father O'Flaherty and the brothers were weary and sore physically from the exertion. After 7 or 8 minutes of violence, Roland, in a tone of complete relief, said, "He's gone." Immediately, Roland came back to normal and said he felt fine. Roland now explained what he saw. He said, "There was a brilliant white light, and in that light stood a very beautiful man with flowing, wavy hair that blew in the breeze. He wore a white robe that fitted close to his body. The material gave the impression of scales. Only the upper half of the body of this man was visible to Roland. In his right hand he held up a wavy and fiery sword in front of him. With his left he pointed down to a pit or cave. Roland said he saw the devil standing in the cave. Roland felt the heat from the cave and saw the flames. First the devil fought, resisting the angel and laughing diabolically. Then the angel smiled at Roland and spoke, but Roland heard only the one word, Dominus. After the angel spoke, the devil and about 10 of his helpers ran back into the fire of the cave or pit. After the devil disappeared, the letters Spite appeared on the bars of the cave. As the devils disappeared into the pit, Roland felt a pulling or tugging in the region of his stomach. As the devils disappeared, he felt a snapping and then felt relaxed completely. He said that this was the most relaxed feeling he had had since the whole experience began in January. Roland related his visual experience at 11 p.m. This time was approximate to the time that the manifestation of the devil began in Cottage City, Maryland in the evening of January 15, 1949. After 12 midnight, Roland led another rosary and the fathers and brothers responded. He was composed and peaceful. Arrangements were made that Father Van Roo would say Mass for Roland in the hospital chapel at 9:30 Tuesday morning. It's been at least a month that he's been going through these exhausting episodes.
Yeah, several times a night sometimes.
Right.
Tuesday, April 19th, Alexian Brothers Hospital. Roland was awakened from a heavy sleep and taken to the chapel where he attended the first Holy Mass since he became a Catholic. He likewise received Holy Communion at the altar rail with no difficulty. Roland promised to say 10 rosaries and thanksgiving to Our Lady of Fatima during the course of the day. When the fathers redacted in the evening, I'm assuming it's retired. I don't know why they would redact it, but it's just, it's like scratched out in the copy I have. So, truth in media. Roland had one more rosary to say, so the fathers and brother joined Roland in his thanksgiving. Since Monday at 11 p.m., there have been no indications of the presence of the devil. The following is dated the Feast of St. Mark, April 25th, 1949. Follow-up. August 19th, 1951. Roland and his father and mother visited the brothers. Roland is now 16 and is a fine young man. His father and mother also became Catholic, having received their first Holy Communion on Christmas Day, 1950. All right, that's all we've got for you tonight on Cryptique. We hope you enjoyed the show. Tell them what they need to know.
Please, as always, share us on social media. It's the best way for people to find out about us. Maybe you have suggestions for us. You can always reach out with that stuff through social media as well. You can find us on TikTok at Cryptique_podcast or at Cryptique Podcast on YouTube. And as always, once again, check out the Parabox link in the show notes. That also helps us out, and they make some pretty cool stuff.
Good evening, Crypt Keepers.